Okay, we'll continue with Federalist number 32. This is part 2. To refresh your mind, in the last section, we talked about concurrent legislation. In other words, there are areas where the Constitution allows both the federal government and the state government to tax people. It doesn't exclude one or the other. But there are areas that the federal government can only tax and state government cannot. And Hamilton here is telling the critics that this makes sense. There are areas like imports that the federal government has only the ability to tax, the authority to tax, and the states shouldn't. Because you will have different rules, different laws, different rates at different states, and it'll create competition of the bad kind. And it'll create animosity between states, and it won't be good for the union. There are areas where the federal government has to set the rule and states cannot. For example, in immigration, in naturalization, when people come to become residents and citizens of the United States, one place, one authority has to set the rules. You can't have 50 different rules by 50 different states. So he's explaining to the critics, to anti-federalists, that with the exception of the areas where we have to, federal government is the only authority to tax, there are lots of places that the state governments can tax, lots of areas, lots of things, and they can get revenue and run the state, and this way they won't be dependent on the federal government, because all these anti-federalists are saying, no, federal government is going to take all the taxes, is not going to allow the states to tax, states will go broke, and they will just go down to nothing, and federal government becomes a unitary, central, nationalistic government, and states will have nothing to say, state governments. And Hamilton says this is not the case. Okay, this is paragraph 3, a case which may perhaps be thought to resemble the latter, but which is in fact widely different, affects the question immediately under consideration. I mean the power of imposing taxes on all articles other than exports and imports. This, I contend, is manifestly a concurrent and co-equal authority in the United States and in the individual states. There is plainly no expression in the granting clause which makes that power exclusive in the Union. There is no independent clause or sentence which prohibits the states from exercising it. So when he says sentence or a clause, a section, these are all about the Constitution. Look at Article 1, Section what so-and-so, clause so-and-so, that's what he's talking about. So far from being the case, then a plain and conclusive argument to the contrary is to be deducible from the restraint laid upon the state in relation to duties on imports and exports. This restriction implies an admission that if it were not inserted, the states would possess the power it excludes. And it implies a further admission that as to all other taxes, the authority of states remain undiminished. In any other view, it would be both unnecessary and dangerous. It would be unnecessary because if the grant to the Union of the power of laying such duties implied the exclusion of the states, or even their subordination in this particular, there could be no need of such a restriction. It would be dangerous because the introduction of it leads directly to the conclusion which has been mentioned, and which, if the reasoning of the objectors be just, could not have been intended. I mean that the states, in all cases to which the restriction did not apply, would have a concurrent power of taxation with the Union. The restriction in question amounts to what lawyers call a negative pregnant. That is, a negation of one thing and an affirmance of another. A negation of the authority of the states to impose taxes on imports and exports, and affirmance of their authority to impose them on all other articles. So here again, he's explaining to the readers that just because we have said we are going to tax, we're going to decide what the import taxes are, it doesn't mean we are denying you, not allowing you to tax other things. That's why he's calling it, he says the lawyers call this negative pregnant. Just because you deny one thing, one section of the law, it doesn't mean you're affirming the other parts, or you're denying the other parts. I'm sorry. A negation of the authority of the states to impose taxes on imports and exports, and an affirmance of their authority to impose them on all other articles. It would be mere sophistry to argue that it was meant to exclude them absolutely from the imposition of taxes of the former kind, and to leave them at liberty to lay other subject to the control of the national legislature. Let me read that again. It would be mere sophistry to argue that it was meant to exclude them absolutely from the imposition of taxes of the former kind, and to leave them at liberty to lay others subject to the control of the national legislature. The restraining or prohibitory clause only says that they shall not, without the consent of the Congress, lay such duties, and if we are to understand this in the sense last mentioned, the Constitution would then be made to introduce a formal provision for the sake of a very absurd conclusion, which is that the states, with no consent of the national legislature, might tax imports and exports, and that they might tax every other article unless controlled by the same body. If this was the intention, why was it not left in the first instance to what is alleged to be the natural operation of the original clause, conferring a general power of taxation upon the Union? It is evident that this could not have been the intention, and that it will not bear a construction of this kind. Okay. So again, there's only a few places, a fair few areas that federal government has the authority to pass laws on, whether it's taxes for revenue or whether it's passing a law to keep the law uniform in all of the United States. But it doesn't mean that states are going to lose their authority to tax other stuff. On the board here, C-SPAN is extremely useful for you, helpful. When you go to C-SPAN's website, you can go to Book TV, you can go to American History, you can look at the series, like on American writers, on American presidents. They've done so many programs that are going to be helpful to you, excuse me, to learn American history. That is wonderful. So take advantage of Book TV, American history. And again, like I said, another good thing about C-SPAN videos is that it's not all about government and politics. They have people that talk about religion in America, writers, culture, all sorts of stuff. So you can find them and benefit from them. And a lot of them have the transcript. It might not be a perfect transcript, but it's a great transcript to help you get started. So make sure you take advantage of what C-SPAN, Book TV, American history, which are all on C-SPAN's website. All of them, all these videos have to offer to you.